So Marc Maron has a new special. It's out right now. I mentioned this before over on the HBO Max app, whatever it's called. And here's a clip.
I think if Hitler were alive today, he'd probably appear on Theo Vaughn's podcast. And Theo would be like, "See, y'all did a lot of meth, right? I mean, all the Nazis were all fucked up on meth, right, Hitler? That shit'll make you crazy, dog. I did some meth once. I was up for 3 days, and then I ate a live bird. No shit, Hitler, a live bird, bro. Hey, Hitler, you probably didn't even hate the Jews. That was just the meth making you crazy, dog. Hey, Hitler. Do you want to apologize to all the Jews right now on my show? No? I get it.
Okay, so that was a clip from the new Marc Maron special. He gets into right-wing comedy. He gets into the popularity of people like Theo Vaughn and those of his ilk. And he gets into the way in which those on the right and comedians on the right, like they won. They won. You know, and what he says in the special, I'll quote the special a little bit here. I don't have clips for everything, and I don't want to get in trouble with Mr. HBO. But, you know, he says, all these people wanted was to say the R word with impunity. A bunch of comedians, many of whom have powerful, audiences, big communities. They make a lot of money. They have huge audiences. They just like wanted to say the R word. And I'm half being silly and half being serious when I say that I think Maron is right, that a lot of people thought that a vote for Trump and a support of that authoritarian regime was their way to like end cancel culture and wokeness. And we can say the R word again. And Maron says something in the special, which I think is really interesting and poignant. He says that now we can bravely speak power to truth. I'll say that again. If I had high production value, I'd put these words on the screen. We can bravely speak power to truth. He's using that to describe like what comedians and cultural figures are doing, what they see as the upside of supporting and getting power from an authoritarian regime. We can speak power to truth. You know, this is a turn of the phrase, speak truth to power. Often in comedy, we might talk about how good comedy punches up, doesn't punch down, meaning that comedy can serve as something that critiques powerful systems and ideologies. Comedy can represent the POV of the outsider or the underdog, not the position of the person who is in power. And Maron points out in the special early on that the opposite thing seems to be happening. And he also does some self-criticism of the liberal leftist style of thing. You know, he says something like, do we realize that we annoyed the average American into fascism? No one can ruin a barbecue quicker than a liberal. I think that he's not wrong there. He says in the special as well that there's never been an actual American left that has functioned in a unified way. Ooh, boy, this is kind of what I was just talking about. But Maron points that out, that it's hard to think of a left fighting back, a left resisting authoritarianism, a leftist artistic comedic creative movement doing anything when there's never been a powerful and organized American left. What he describes is a world where you just lock into issues and that makes you feel better. Locking into the individual thing. I talked about this on the video that I put out a few weeks ago on the problem with leftist politics. I got into the work of Anna Kornbluh there and her critique of immediacy. And she talks about this. I talk about it in the video. There is a tendency for a lot of folks, like you lock into a particular issue, a particular cause that you experience or participate in the way one experiences or participates in like a media spectacle. And it feels good to do that. And your identity is formed around your care, your concern, your media consumption of topics related to a particular cause. But in doing so, it's not building out a functional, unified left. And of course, you know, I showed you the clip where Maron talks about what would happen if Hitler were alive today. Now, what's just as interesting, and I'll say this as well, it's actually a funny special. I know describing like a critique of the lack of a unified left doesn't sound funny, but it is a very funny special. He does some very interesting, I think, dare I say, artistic things there. But Maron on, but Maron sort of on the, I guess you'd call it like the campaign trail, on his promotional trail for this special, said a lot of stuff that I found really interesting. So I want to look at a few more things. Let me pull this up. And I don't know. I talked about Marc Maron a bit recently. I think he's a very funny guy. I think he's someone who's worth taking seriously as a comedian. Here's some comments that he made on the Bad Friend or Bad Friends podcast about the Austin political scene, or the Austin comedy scene. The Austin comedy scene, of course, is associated with Joe Rogan's club, the Mothership, the Motherload, the Big Ship, the Mothership, the Daddy Ship. I don't know what it's called. And people like Shane Gillis and other folks in that world, Tony Hinchcliffe, things like that. But I think he says some interesting stuff here. So I want to look at this clip.
What do you think the Austin shelf life is going to be?
Well, I don't know. Like, I think that it's so effectively tribalized at this point. It really comes down to material. I mean, at what point, it's like whatever they represented in terms of policy. And it's not a stretch. It's like they won. Trans people are frightened. They have no ability to get health care anymore, and they're afraid of being alive and have no freedom left. So that's done. When do you stop with the jokes?
When do you stop with the jokes?
And like,
interesting point there. And I think, what Maron is getting at, we'll finish the clip in a second, but, he's getting at the fact that like, it felt like, or some of the people in those comedic communities critiqued trans folks or queer folks or sort of woke ideologies as if they were being oppressed or they were outsiders to a more powerful system. But now, of course, those comedians, many of them directly supported Trump and that regime is now in many ways endangering the lives of trans folks, marginalized folks, immigrants, people of color. So what are those people speaking to? What is the point of their entire comedic project at this point?
Like immigrants, okay, well, they're being ripped away from their homes, and and they're all terrified, and okay, so that's done. When do you stop with the jokes?
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to pick on the vulnerable and the marginalized, but I mean, they're down.
Yeah.
And it continues to be the question, like, why is it funny? Like, what is funny? And I don't want to be so nitpicky. I don't want to poke the dead frog and suck all the life out of comedy. But from a structural, philosophical, analytic perspective, what is funny about just like making fun of people in marginalized communities when you are members of non-marginalized communities?
I mean, like,
they're down.
why do you got to keep hitting them unless you're a hack? Now, there's a question.
Mark,
He comes in swinging.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's interesting for a variety of reasons. But one thing he gets into there is the idea that maybe these comedians are just hack. I think that's true. Like, think about, especially if you're my age, the first really funny person you knew was probably an older kid on the school bus or the bus stop, or that you saw at 7-Eleven after school when you were trying to buy a Slurpee for 99 cents or something, who made fun of other people. And it was usually he was funny because he ripped on people, was funny because he put other people down, shout out to mama jokes and things of that nature. Now, normally those people don't become comedians. It doesn't age well. They don't often become artists because, they're just doing like cruelty in those instances. I think what Maron's pointing out is that actual comedians should have a POV, should have something they're trying to say, should be exploring ideas. And if you're only funny, if all of your material is like, ha, 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 trans folks, like, what are we doing? It's not very funny. It's not very interesting. It's just not. It's just not. Let's check out. So another thing that Maron did is he went on the Howie Mandel podcast. Now, I'll be honest, I've never watched the Howie Mandel show until watching this clip
I've been seeing
for
Jezel.
this video. It seems pretty tough. I don't know if I ever want to watch the Howie Mandel thing in my life. But let's watch a little bit of this because I think Maron brings up some great points here as well. Dark Nieces in the chat says about the put down comic, it's funny if you're intellectually still back in middle school. Yeah, that's true. That's very much true. So this is Marc Maron on the show Howie Mandel Does Stuff, a show that let's all hope we never have to watch again besides this clip.
Nick having an issue with people like Tony Hinchcliffe, who he's saying uses profanity or just shock value.
And to be clear, if you missed the context there, she's saying that Anthony Jeselnik has been critical of Tony Hinchcliffe and some of those comedians who do shock value stuff, but maybe don't have a comedic POV.
Comedy. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, at this point, it's lazy and sloppy and hackneyed. You know, to be in a fucking club where, you know, I'm walking down the hall at the comedy club, at the Comedy Store, and, you know, in one room, someone's doing their bit about trans people, and then I get down the hall and there's someone on stage going, well, I guess I got to do my bit about trans people. Like, no, you don't. You don't. It's hack now.
Again, I think this is important both politically and creatively. I think a lot of what Maron's doing is just saying, you know, I don't think this is him like canceling or even woke scolding. He's simply pointing out that it's not good art. It's not good comedy. It's not interesting if all you can do is like have the funniest trans joke.
I mean, you know, you guys got the freedom you wanted. You can now say whatever you want. They're defeated. Their rights have been denied. The policies that you guys encouraged with your stupid material are now policy. And now, like, you know, half the people under the umbrella of anti-woke, we've lost a tremendous amount of democratic-leaning ideas and movements. So whether they knew it or not, that's what they were spearheading. So now it's reality, and you want to still keep kicking them?
I mean, great point there. But it does remind me of how years ago, you know, like people in American culture didn't like rock and roll. Rock and roll was bad. It was satanic. It was evil. People had to fight for their rights to party. They couldn't show Elvis's pelvis. Elvis's pelvis is Elvis's on TV. Musicians and artists were marginalized, and eventually they broke through. Eventually they had freedom to express themselves. But it wasn't that freedom led to music where like John Lennon hit a guitar and said the N-word. You know, it wasn't like the whole point of the project for the Rolling Stones was to write a song called Billy is an R-word. They fought for a type of creative freedom to express something real and human. Like, God, think about like blues, soul, and R&B music artists who literally couldn't tour in parts of the country. You know, a lot of the Motown acts and stuff like that. Like when they went to the South eventually, A, the shows were segregated. That's a cool vibe. And B, people would try to kill them. They would try to kill them. If you were a black artist from the North touring the South, a blues artist, a soul artist, a Motown artist, they were getting marginalized for their art, but their art was creatively expressing real things about humanity, specifically from the POV of a marginalized group of people. But these folks, these comedians, fought for their freedom to do what? To do what?
I don't know that the comedians have had that much power.
Are you fucking out of your mind?
No, I'm being serious.
Joe Ray. I'm not gonna.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
You know, you can't separate. Like, if the movement is like, you know, we're being censored. No, you're not. You're not. There's no constitutional censorship issue with your free speech.
It just reminds me of like Bari Weiss free press stuff. Like the people complaining about freedom of speech are people that are always just like mad that they can't do hate speech.
You say things, and in a democratic shit show of an environment, you know, like Twitter or whatever, there's cultural pushback. And I'm not saying that it wasn't, it was pretty bad. in terms of, people getting canceled and stuff. And I agree that was an issue, but that's a specific issue. To frame it as some sort of free speech problem was a misdirect. It wasn't. It wasn't a free speech problem. It was that people were.
And also just a reminder that, like, I guess to go back to that, musical example, desiring creative freedom and freedom of expression for musicians and artists, again, it's like being suppressed, being marginalized for making art you believe in. Your goal is to be able to freely express those things in a way that I would argue expands humanity, right? It is limiting for humanity if artists of color or queer artists or women who make art or whoever, if they are not considered a part of like the artistic culture and ecosystem, that is limiting the humanity of who is participating in culture and art. When we expand that, it is good. The type of creative freedom these comedians are talking about, again, is not to expand the realm of human freedom. Because a lot of historical freedom of speech stuff was like freedom for people to express dissenting viewpoints, freedom for marginalized groups to defend themselves and talk about their own humanity, right? Expanding the circle of humanity. But when freedom of speech for these folks, they act as if they're fucking MLK or something. But what they're fighting for is the reduction of the humanity of people that aren't like them. That's what they're fighting for. I don't love it. Do you love it? Say so if you do.
Getting cultural pushback. That is not a constitutional issue. No one was being put in jail for saying anything. That's a free speech issue. But my problem is you're going to start talking about...
And again, you might say, well, it's still not a free speech issue. Like, no one's being marginalized. Like, there are artists who are having like their visas denied to come play music in America because they've been critical of the genocide in Gaza. There's musicians and artists from other countries who are trans or who have various like immigration statuses that lead to them not being able to come here and do art. Like, this is having a real effect on people.
Anti-woke, and that's going to be your point of view. That's going to be your ideological, grounding for what you do. Okay, that's fine. But why does it have to be the same four fucking things? It's like they talk about the same shit. And I don't know a better definition of hack. I mean, after a certain point, it's like, so what juice does the word retard really have? How much shit do you have to give trans people? What is your big problem with gay people? What's your big problem with women? It's like, what is this, the fucking 80s again? And it's so, to me, the problem is that language evolves. Okay, we don't use the word chink anymore. Well, maybe some of them do. You don't use the word oriental anymore. You don't use the word colored anymore. Is that, in a democratic world, people learn to treat other people with respect, communities, and live with it. So this pushback, I don't know how you frame it.
I mean, a lot of this too makes me think about, I'm going to do a very me thing right here, but a lot of this does make me think about, someone like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Enlightenment philosopher, a way he described the human project was about sacrificing the individual will for the sake of the collective will. We have more power personally and politically when occasionally we prioritize what's good for everyone. And it just feels like there are people for whom their political and social ideology is that it's more important that they get to like say the R word or make trans jokes than that trans people feel safe and included in our society. It's nuts. It's nuts.
As anything other than,
but I think it's an outward vocalization of the time. I just went and saw Ricky Gervais at the Hollywood Bowl.
What a bore!
I love that moment. I was like, I just saw Ricky Gervais. Marin like can't even deal with it. And if you don't know, I didn't make the clip wasn't on screen. Hopefully you guys heard it. I'll go back so you can see his facial reaction.
Word vocalization of the time. I just went and saw Ricky Gervais at the Hollywood Bowl.
What a bore!
Now you saw Marin's reaction. Now it's real. If you're not familiar with Ricky Gervais's comedy, besides being in The Office, his like whole thing now is he wears tight black t-shirts I don't think he exercises, but he wears tight black t-shirts, and he's like, God is stupid. You imagine believing in Christ. Imagine believing there's a guy and he's killed his son. He killed his son. Science, rationalism, and like it's just like it's like if Richard Dawkins thought he was funny or something. It's so boring. It's so boring, and it's so faux edgy. It's the most faux edgy crap ever. All that says, that's why I understand why Maron reacted that way.
No, brilliant.
You loved it.
I loved it.
All right, go ahead.
Fucking brilliant.
All right.
Fucking brilliant. And he talked about kind of like this on stage. I think this new show is called Mortality. And he talked about, you know, what we are appalled at or what we think is stupid is all about the time. And this is what I'm talking about, our cultural shift. We're not shifting it, it's shifting.
I did pre-watch this clip. He's about to make a point that's great. If you're like half paying attention, pay attention for a little bit because this gets real bad.
I was like, listen, right now, everybody talks. The worst thing you can be is a racist. You know, you can't, you can't, you know, and it is right now. I mean, if that's probably the number one negative.
I don't.
First of all, it's weird to be like, I mean, the worst thing you'd be is a racist. Everyone cares about racism. Yeah, because it's bad. It's dumb. Don't be racist. It's not hard. It's not hard. You guys probably aren't racist. I try not to be racist. Yeah, do we have internalized biases? Sure. But like, oh.
I don't think that's true. I think that maybe since he's written that show, the screw is turned. It doesn't seem to be the most negative thing at all. But we have a president who's a racist. And he's very popular.
He's not identified as one, though.
Well, how much digging do you have to do? Get me on a computer. I can do it in 2 clicks.
What is Howie Mandel's thing, man? What's his thing? What's his deal? Why is this the hill that he's choosing to?
No, I know, but half the country doesn't agree with you.
So it's not the biggest problem, is it?
It's if you call him that, it's incredibly.
People call him that every day.
I know, and they are hating it.
Who is?
The people that are following that side.
I just don't understand the logic of anything he's saying here.
Well, I'm just saying that the premise is faulty.
Well, let me tell you that, but let me finish the premise. The premise is whatever you believe is a racist move, if he lived, Ricky Gervais, lived 100 years ago and bought 100 slaves, he's an aristocrat. He's not a racist. He would.
So, okay, let's pause this for a second. It seems like the point he's making about Ricky Gervais is like, yeah, we say racism is bad now, but what if he bought humans 100 years ago? First of all, 100 years ago, we're talking about the what is that, the 1920s? Beside the point. He wasn't bad. He was an aristocrat. No, slavery was actually still bad then, right? You know, the owl of Minerva flies at dusk. Just because we sometimes don't understand the morality of things until retrospect doesn't mean that the things weren't fundamentally immoral. For example, when I was a teen, I would use the R slur and the F slur with my friends in ways to me that didn't feel hateful. I didn't think I was being hateful. I didn't have hatred in my heart. I just thought they were funny and transgressive words to say. Later in life, I understood why those aren't good things to say and why language that I did not mean hurtfully could be hurting people. I didn't want to do that. So I looked back and could retroactively see, oh, I was saying something I shouldn't have said. 2 things can be true at once. I was speaking in a way that I didn't mean or I didn't intend to be hateful, but I was doing that. I was participating in a type of language that made other people feel bad. It doesn't mean that it was okay to do it. It just means I didn't realize it at the time. So the point, again, I see someone in the chat saying, I need John Brown to visit him, and I love that. I need John Brown to roll up on Ricky Gervais immediately. But like, that's not how it works, guys. It doesn't work in a way where it's like, well, you used to be able to do this. You used to be able to do this. Well, you used to be able to do a lot of stuff, guys. Doesn't mean that it was good. Doesn't mean that it should be legal. Doesn't mean that we can't critique those things right now, okay? It's really, really boring. It's so boring. Oh my God, and intellectually incurious.
Would be applauded for owning a plantation and being that, and because
who would applaud him for owning a plantation?
Because he doesn't live there.
Well, we're coming close to that again, so I still think the timing is off.
But the point is, right now, if somebody tried to buy 100 slaves and had, African American people
Well, give
working
it a
for
year.
them.
It's going to be Mexicans, or it's going to be white people.
No, the Mexicans are being thrown out right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, until they create a new cast of people that'll fill those jobs. I mean, it doesn't. I don't want to get into politics.
Okay. I mean, here's too, again, a lot of these comedian folks, and now I don't know everything there is to know about Howie Mandel and his host, but there's an entire category of people, comedians who have money, that live in like nice neighborhoods in LA, that have fancy podcast studios. They like don't live in the real world. They live in their own little like millionaire entertainment bubble. When they say this stuff about politics and society, it's like, you have no fucking idea what you're talking about. And, Maron's making the point there. Like, it is not far off to imagine a world where they create some like new immigration status that is indentured servitude. Maybe you let me know. Am I being insane for saying that? Am I being silly? I don't know, but I could easily see a world where, Stephen Miller is like jacking off the drawings of Joseph Goebbels and then has an idea for, I know what we'll do for immigration. We're now creating a path to temporary partial citizenship where visas are applied for by a business owner, and the business owner has the responsibility of managing the temporary citizenship of the laborer. And they are not applied to like, we don't have the same minimum wage laws or whatever. Like, they're going to do something like that. And Maron's pointing it out. Eddie does ask what it's like in the millionaire entertainment bubble. My feet are currently being massaged by a gaggle of Thai models. So it's pretty freaking great.
Politics.
Go ahead.
No,
I don't mind.
I just
love your passion.
I understand
love your passion.
what you're saying, and I look. I think you can say whatever you want. I don't care. I have no, I've been filthy. I've said all the bad things on stage. I've been doing this a long time under the radar in a lot of ways, and I've tried everything. I've done things that were inappropriate on stage. I've said things that were inappropriate on stage, and my experience with people receiving those things and talking to people, and I've evolved the way I present comedy. I think when you talk about Jeselnik, he's just saying that, isn't there a creativity workaround that could be funny without creating this juice that just comes from using words that used to be kind of triggering and are less now because the dominant cultural force is now slightly fascistic and leaning towards alienating those voices.
And if you've never seen the Jeselnik interview that I think they're referring to right here, Anthony Jeselnik said in an interview something to the effect of, good art is getting away with it. His point there was, if a comedian tells a joke where they say something edgy or transgressive, and people are like, hey, that was offensive and shitty and made people feel bad, it means they didn't do good art. Because they didn't tell a joke. They transgressed boundaries of language or identity for the sake of transgression, not for the sake of art. A good comedian says the thing or flirts with the dangerous idea in a way in which they get away with it. I mean, think historically, people like, Lenny Bruce and Richard Pryor and George Carlin, people who said stuff that was really transgressive at the time, but they got away with it because they were doing something artistic with it. They weren't just like saying slurs because it's fun to say slurs,
So now that we've crossed that hump into what we are now, aren't you just kicking someone when they're down and just being a hack? Because there is no real progressive pushback anymore. They've won, right?
And I think another thing that's interesting to point out here is Maron is one of the few people in the comedy world who is willing to call out his fellow comedians for their complicity in this. A lot of people won't. A lot of politicians who a lot of comedians who I think present themselves or benefit from being identified as liberal, progressive, whatever, they keep their mouths shut on this stuff because they still want to suck the teat and make money. I appreciate that he's willing to do that. Almost done with this clip.
So that side has won. They've won culture, and they've won the presidency, and now you have a lot of frightened people that believe in what was once democracy in terms of respecting all types of people. That's kind of gone. So do you continue along that track of like being the victim
of something, some liberal conspiracy, when it clearly is over? I don't know.
Look at this picture of these two. They just have their hats and they're just like looking at each other. His little jacket. I don't know what her deal is. I wouldn't feel comfortable if, like, imagine right now behind me there was just a big picture of me with someone else. We're both wearing silly hats. Maybe I should get that. If someone wants to make that, I'll put it up.
So maybe I stand with Jeselnik.
Yeah, my understanding of what he was saying was less about politics and where we are as a culture and society right now, and more about the art of comedy. And to him, it's not comedy just to say something shocking.
That's right. So you work around.
Yeah.
You know, be more creative.
Yeah.
Don't be a hack.
But you also are giving comedy a lot more power than I think it has in our society.
I think that might have been true a few years ago, but I don't think that's true anymore. Because with what you're doing now, what you're doing here, once old time show.
Like, again, when you have fucking JD Vance and Trump on the Theo Vaughn show and Rogan and all this stuff, comedians have power whether they like it or not. They have access to power. They have the power to influence folks. They have political power, and they are using that power.
Business. Look, if you connect all this anti-elitism, anti-Hollywood talk to right-wing ideology and propaganda, what has happened now is that old-time show business is anemic. It's dead.
Yes.
And so, what's happened is, and in a good way, entrepreneurial way, which is, sort of, your bag, is that, you can start your own show business and you can find your own audience.
Right.
And, that all, seemed pretty good. But if a lot of, and these are comics, if the audience that you build has decided they know what real comedy is, they know that woke people suck, they know that, whatever, scientists are liars, they know that, whatever the ideological foundation of that audience is, if you're a comic at the tip of that iceberg and you're championing that just by being funny and then skirting the responsibility by saying, like, yeah, I'm just a comic, my fans are my fans, then I think you're being disingenuous or stupid. I do think that comedy, or certain comedians, have a great deal of cultural weight now. You don't have
when I was coming up, Mort Saul, who was
okay, I think he's getting at something really important there, and I don't know how explicit or implicit that Maron's intentionally being here. But think about it this way. The point he just made is that it seems like a good thing that we've now created a media ecosystem where people can be entrepreneurial and, own their own work and create their own communities. I'll speak as a person that does something like that. Like, what I do right now, I couldn't have done this maybe 10 to like 20, 30 years ago. It just didn't exist, right? To create a type of media that, like maybe a couple 100,000 people in the world care about seeing. And that can be sustainable. In the past, if I wanted to like host a show and talk about stuff, you either have to have a radio show or a local TV show or something like that. But now there's an opportunity for people to be, like middle-class creatives, middle-class talk show hosts, comedians, public thinkers, whatever it is, which is, in a sense, a good thing. But what Maron, and I think he points this out in another interview I listened to this week, the thing people maybe aren't thinking about is that those mediums and platforms are not neutral. So we're using YouTube right now. It is not a neutral thing that people put content on this platform. Why is that the case? Because what plays well on this platform, what plays well on digital media platforms generally? Rage bait, clickbait, drama content, angry content, slop stuff, AI crap, beef slurs, name calling. This person hates this person and they're bad and you won't believe this idiot, and this person gets called out and this person gets taken down. So it's structurally built into those systems that you are then rewarded for doing that sort of stuff. So when the sort of middle class, and of course upper class, because people that make millions doing stuff like this, when those very platforms are fueled by political resentment and anger and hatred, that doubles back in the type of content that is produced on those platforms. Even further, and this relates back to the Hassan Piker GQ piece, it then creates toxic communities of people that do that. So when Maron talks about like people that do a certain sort of comedy and their audience is like, this is what comedy really is, it just creates these really hateful and closed off feedback loops, to use the language I was using earlier in the show, that limit humanity, don't expand humanity. And I think that's important. But yeah, do I think that you should watch the Maron special if you have access to an HBO account? Sure, why not? Do I think that he's making some important points? Yes, I do. Do I think that we all need to think about the weird complicity of comedy in the media ecosystem more generally, and its complicity with political regimes? Yes. Do I think that this only means that people should be attacking the right? No, because I think there's a lot of liberal complicity with what's happening right now. There's a whole like liberal middle ground. This is kind of, we were talking about Hassan and Dean Withers and stuff earlier, that I think gets away with it a little bit. And there's an example of this I want to look at.